Patrick Curran, the British chaplain in Vienna, had a family occasion.
Talk 49.
Patrick Curran, this year your mother turned 101. Congratulations to your mother. Tell us a bit about your mother, Patrick.
Yeah, my mother was born in 1920 in Neumünster, which is in Schleswig-Holstein, which is north of Hamburg in Germany. And her father was a pharmacist, and he was working in a pharmacy in Kiel at the time. And from there they moved to Altona in Hamburg when she was about 16. So she went to a Mädchengymnasium, to a high school for girls in Altona. And that was during the time of the Nazis. And she was obviously involved with the movement, because you had to be. But she was dismissed from the movement because she didn't show enough interest at the time. She finished her Abitur and then went on to study pharmacy in one Strasbourg, also in Gera, and completed her studies and then helped her father in the pharmacy that he was able to buy in the 1930s in Altona. She came to Vienna once with her friend who she was studying with Gisela, a good family friend, and they remember walking around the ring in their unsuitable shoes because it was winter. The snow was on the ground and the shoes they had or brought with them were not adequate to the weather. After the war, and that's where it gets interesting from my point of view, as she meets my father, who is an occupation officer, British forces. So at this time you couldn't fraternize with the enemy, so he was soon moved out of intelligence, of course, but stayed in Germany as an officer. Yeah. And they met, and as soon as they were able to marry, they did get married. And my father started to try and build up a business. My mother continued in the pharmacy that her father owned in Altona. It was called Victoria Apotheke, Victoria Drugstore Pharmacy. But at one stage, they made the decision that they needed to leave Germany and build a new life for themselves. And so they went to Canada. Canada at that time was interested in bringing Europeans across to help populate the country, help with its economy. So we've ended up in Ontario and in Toronto, first living in an area called Rosedale, and then later on in Scarborough. My father then was working for a Volkswagen company as a car salesman, and he was able to get his own franchise in a place outside Toronto, in a place called Galt, now called Cambridge. And that's what he did. He had his own dealership and was able also to acquire a gas station, BP, of course. It was very much a kind of desire of his. So he built up this business. We lived in this beautiful neighborhood in Cambridge. The idea was that we would stay there the rest of our lives, but that didn't work out, and we came back to Germany.
Patrick, when you grew up bilingual?
No, not really, because my mother particularly, her main aim was that we became integrated into Canadian society as quickly as possible, so she didn't really speak very much German at home. We had links to German-speaking people in Ontario, but at home we always spoke English.
How old were you when you came back to Germany?
So I was about 13. I was almost 13.
So that's still very young. That's
Yeah.
young enough to pick up a language from scratch, isn't it?
No, so I was put in a school right away on the Baltic coast, a place called Timmendorfer Strand. There was an internat, a boarding facility, so that you could attend the local schools in the area. So I went to the Ostsee Gymnasium, and that's where I learned German. But of course, I had very little German when I first went into the school and had to learn by just being in this internat. And that was a steep learning curve, and it took a while. And of course, the grammar's not that easy. And they were already doing languages. So if you don't have the language which you're being taught, then learning a language from a German speaker isn't that straightforward. So that was a real challenge for me. I, in the end, was able to overcome that, and it's been a great blessing that I had that upbringing, and that I did then acquire a second language and lived in a different culture, that of northern Germany, post Second World War, 60s, 70s. We moved to Germany in 69. I talked a little bit about how we tried to establish a life in Canada, and very much the idea was that my parents wanted to settle there. That would be the future of our family. But my father was a bit older than my mother, and my mother was very concerned that in their old age they would have sufficient money or pension so that they could look after themselves in their old age. And so she decided that she would go back to Hamburg and see if there were any possibilities there to, one, work as a pharmacist, and possibly to open up her own pharmacy. And she's doing this at the age of 50, that has to be said. She thought about it numerous times over the years and needed to see how my father's businesses would work out. The Volkswagen, if you remember at the time, the Beetle, was just coming to the end of its enormous success as a car, and the company hadn't really got a successor model, so there was a real slump in sales. It's not good for a car dealership. So my mother went back to Hamburg and tried to establish herself there. Her good friend, Gisela, her sister was a pharmacist, and she had a pharmacy in a place called Bad Segeberg, and was willing to take my mother on initially to help her with the running of the pharmacy there. And there was also a flat in this pharmacy that Gretel had, so my mother could start right away working as a pharmacist. And then my mother was able to locate a pharmacy in Hamburg, which she then also bought. She could do this because somebody from before the war who knew my grandfather well, working in pharmacy wholesale, guaranteed her loan. He said, if there's any problem, I will guarantee your loan. And a good friend of my mother's also said, I will guarantee the loan should there be any problems. So she had these two supporters who never gave her anything. They just said they guarantee the loans, made it possible for her to buy this pharmacy, and then within a certain period of time to pay it off, and also with this pharmacy then to buy the house in which the pharmacy was situated, at Sin's house, with a number of flats. So that became her business. She was successful at it. She was committed to it, made a lot of sacrifices in terms of time that she had to make. She had to invest. My father helped her then in the pharmacy, then came later from Canada, and then did the accountancy and the errands and the cooking. And they were able to also, through friends, to have a little Kate is called, sort of like a summer place just outside of Hamburg, where we went to over the weekends, which was on a lovely lake called Großensee. And so they were able to establish a life for themselves, and it was a very successful life. And my mother worked then till she was 67, 68. Then she sold the pharmacy and would then afterwards help out in the pharmacy as the pharmacist, because you need somebody to cover your holidays. And my father continued to do the books in the pharmacy, so we built up a very good relationship to the successor to my mother, to the new owner of the pharmacy. It's in a very interesting part of town. It's known as Nord St. Pauli, so it's not very far from the Reeperbahn. That area has changed completely. It used to be very working class, and now it's a very in place for young students and people who are basically single. It's known as the Schanzenviertel, and it's a place where there's a lot of life in the evenings with lots of restaurants.
Your mother was a very successful businesswoman. What did she do when she wasn't running a business? Who did she meet? Did she go to church? Was she a believer? What about this side of your mum?
I'll come to that in a minute, if I may. Just to say that something I didn't realize too much later, and it's something that has affected me in a different way, I suppose, is that my mother studied already in the 40s. And she was then this professional woman. She always worked. So I've only ever known a mother who works. So I have a kind of different I guess, entree to many people in my generation who would have only known their mother to be at home and not to go out to work. Not only did my mother not just go out to work, she owned her own business, and where my father then supported her. So we've owned these different businesses, so they were very much business people. And yeah, that she was already studying in her 40s. As somebody said to me, well, she must have been one of the first women to study. Well, yeah, that's right. There weren't so many women who had studied at that time. Yeah, what did she do in her spare time? Well, there wasn't so much, but she certainly, family was very important. Family is very important to all of us in our family. We're kind of family people. I guess I see that in my generation with my children and now with my grandchildren. We're all regularly visiting each other and my mother when we can. That's a little bit less now because of the pandemic. My daughter Victoria is very keen that my mother still sees her second child, Finn, and so that's a desire. They hope to be able to travel up this summer. Yes, my parents got involved in church. My father, when he came to Hamburg, got involved with church right away, and so they built up a life, one with family, with our family that are in Hamburg, because her sister was still there, her mother was still alive, my cousins are there, and my cousins all have children, so there's a network there. And then there was church. Those were the kind of two. And the house that we had, or this little summer house that we had. So those were the fixed points of our life. Church, family, and these friends that my mother had from before the war.
It sounds like a very, very stable life to me. But of course then you went to Canada and studied theology, didn't you?
So I finished my Abitur at the Josef Gymnasium, and my parents had paid into this educational fund. I think it was like initially $10 a month, starting in 1956, Canadian dollars. I don't know if it ever increased, but that was the commitment. And so my father paid into this till I was 18. And the only way you could access this money for tuition fees was if you actually studied in Canada. Of course, my father was very keen that we access this money because he was a business person. But he also, this was very important to him, that his children got the best education possible, because he believed, as many parents do, that that's your ticket, you might say, through life.
Patrick, how old were you when you left home to go to Canada?
I was 21, right? So I left when I was 21. And as I said, I went to the University of King's College and to do this one-year program initially. And then I decided to stay on. I also met my wife at the end of my first year. And so there was another reason to come back and finish my studies in Canada.
Then, of course, you came back from Canada, and then family was more or less based in Europe again, wasn't it? You became a a member of the clergy, you were ordained.
Yeah, so I was in England, they were in Germany, and then for numerous years, and probably till this day, we only would see each other during the holidays. We would go to them. Occasionally they would come to England, but more we would go to them in Hamburg to my mother and my father and spend time with them.
Do you still feel a little bit German, or do you feel what do you feel, Patrick? Are you Canadian? Are you German, or are you world?
I'm certainly not world, that much I can say. I've grown up in 3 places: Germany, Canada, and England. So I've lived a very privileged Western life, I have to say. So that's where I would find myself, what might be called Western civilization. There is a North American part of me, there's a German part of me. My father was English. We lived and we enjoyed living in England very much. We appreciated the culture. But that I can tell you, Nigel, is that when I first went to England, I thought, oh, this is going to be very easy because we have the same language. Well, we have the same language and we don't. Sometimes words mean different things. And the English are much more subtle, or at least they are in the south of England where I came from. That's why I think I felt much more comfortable when I moved north to be the chaplain at the University of Bradford. You know, Yorkshire people call a spade, and so it is. It's very straightforward.
Patrick, you've been in Vienna for how long?
I came in 2000.
That's 21 years, isn't it?
Yeah, I never thought I would be in Vienna that long.
You've got a daughter, right?
2 daughters.
2 daughters.
Yes, yeah.
How do they feel? Are they Viennese, or are they also this funny mixture like you are?
Well, they were born in Yorkshire, in Bradford, both of them. Victoria even started going to school and had a Bradford accent, Yorkshire accent, which she has now lost. And then we were in Bonn, Cologne for 7 years, and then we moved here, as you already said, in 2000. So a lot of their schooling has been here. But Victoria can tell the story of how she was criticized by one of her fellow Austrian colleagues, pupils in the school, saying, well, you have a funny dialect. To which she said, you think I have a funny dialect? You should hear yourself first.
That's a very, very good one. Patrick, of course, living in Europe, in Vienna, your mum still lives in Hamburg.
Yeah, so we go and visit her regularly. She's always been the most gracious hostess. She's always been the most generous person. She's very easygoing, and even now in her old age, she still has a sense of humor. She has a good memory, not so now good for what's happened the day before, but a good memory. She loves to tell family stories, and she does tell them at great length. They can be slightly repetitive now, but she's a bit of a storyteller. That's the way I should put it. Generous, hospitable, kind, interested, has a very good personality, and even now, though since Christmas she's deteriorated a lot physically, so it's becoming very difficult for her, and she's much more in bed than is good for her, because she just has pain. But she has a wonderful carer, and the carer and she get on very well, and have a good relationship to each other, so we're very grateful for that. But my mother just has a very good personality. It's something that she's been gifted with. Life has been kind to her, and she understands that and appreciates that. She's very committed to her family. Yeah, no, so I say our family is very close. Even with our cousins, we're very close, which is a kind of interesting phenomenon. I sort of stepped outside of that for a while. I didn't want to sort of be taken in by the family, but I'm very much part of that family.
How did you celebrate your mum's birthday, Patrick?
Well, sadly, we couldn't get together for her 100th. We were going to have this wonderful occasion which was going to be at the Anglo-German Club in Hamburg. The Anglo-German Club is a club that we have a connection with since my father, because as an officer, he was a member of the club after the war, because basically we had a wonderful celebration for him there when he turned 80, and we were going to do the same for my mother on her 100th birthday, and she would have been good enough to have really taken in the whole occasion. Would have been a wonderful celebration with the nearest and dearest and those who have become carers for her in her last years. So we were going to be about 60 people here at the Anglo-German Club. And I think we were going to have beef Wellington because that was one of my father's favorites. That would have been a fantastic occasion. Wasn't meant to be. This year, still because of the pandemic, I was able to go, or I said I must go, and I did go. And Beata, her carer, made it a good occasion. And my cousins with their wives turned up. So we were, 6 people all together, with her 7, and we celebrated her birthday, and there was good food, and we ordered in. Beata loves making cakes, so was that. And Beata had also organized an accordion player who sang some shanties. So that was the occasion.
Perfect. When are you going again, Patrick?
I've just been again, so I try to go every 6 weeks. So we'll see. Yeah, I'm trying to go every 6 weeks, and so we'll go for the summer again, and spend a longer period of time with my mother. Then I was with her last summer and spent a good 2 weeks with her then. So as much as I can, we go. We couldn't really go for Christmas, but I did go for Christmas afterwards for a week. So I'm going quite regularly.
Patrick, mothers are very important.
Yes, I'm very blessed with a great mother. I think you've got some sense of that through her being very engaged with life. She's tireless, or was tireless. She would wear us all out, and she certainly wore me out, so I had to keep my distance. She had all the plans, doing this, doing that. She loves people, and she loves parties, and she would be often the last person to leave the party. So a lot of energy, a lot of wisdom, and a hard-working person, it has to be said, with a heart of gold.
Heart of gold. Patrick Curran, thank you very, very much.
Talk 49.